In this video, we're going to be replacing the rear springs on this 1966 Mustang Convertible. This car was completely restored back to new condition about 8 years ago, and it's probably only got maybe 1,000 miles on it since then. I put those wheels and tires on in a previous video a few months ago. I love how they make the car look. It gave it just the look that I'm looking for by, as far as wheels and tires can go. But I don't like that it's nose up in the front. And I mean, you can tell, these, for whatever reason, they're nose up in the front. So I called Eaton Springs and spoke with Mike a few months back. And during the course of that conversation, we talked about, adding shackles for the back. But that's kind of a Band-Aid treatment, and he wasn't crazy about that. And he said for up to an inch of change, I think he said he would go as much as an inch on a set of shackles, which would only change, I want to say that would only lift the rear of the body up like a half an inch. So how much you add in spring or shackle, you only get half that much in effect of the measurement from your fender to the floor. So I came out here, this has been months ago again, and I jacked it up and I got it to where I kind of liked it, where it was just level. And I don't remember what those measurements are now. I believe at the time, I think Mike told me a set of springs was about $500, and I didn't want to spend it, and that's been a few months ago. But now we're coming on spring, and I want to go ahead and get this thing ready to drive this year. So I think I'm going to go ahead and pull the trigger and order some springs for it. I just don't like that nose up stance, and that is factory. Again, this thing was completely restored, and it got a new set of springs on the back. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure, just using a tape measure off the floor, and I'm going to do the best I can of eyeballing a measurement here. And then I'm going to go ahead and put a jack on the floor and probably put a block of wood, probably on that, I don't know, the easiest thing to get to is probably this rear spring mount. Probably put a block of wood on that spring mount and jack it up a little bit until it looks level. Stand back here and look at it. And just keep eyeballing it. Jack up the jack a little bit until I get the stance that I want. And I'll show you guys what that looks like here in just a minute. Well, I've been out here, jack it up, let it down, walk around it, jack it up, walk around it, let it down, walk around it, just back and forth for probably 2 hours. And right now it's sitting 2 inches higher in the rear than stock. When I measure from the concrete to the top of the wheel well, when it's sitting on its own, it's 26.5. Right now it sits at 28.5. I think that's where I like it. So I'm gonna go tomorrow, call Eaton Springs. Hopefully I talk to Mike again, because he seemed like he knows everything about springs and stance and old cars, and tell him what I want to do and get some springs ordered, and I'll get back with you guys when I got some springs. All right, it's about a week or two later. Springs came in a couple days ago. I'm just now getting out here to do this. And I bought the springs these were almost $600 for the pair of them. This is +2. They had the options on the site. And then when I called and talked to them to order, the +2 is what I wanted to do. I wanted to go 2 inches, and actually that's a standard sort of an upgrade for them. So they do a stock ride height, which will make it look like that again. Then they do, I think, a +1 and a +2, and I think they go a -1 and maybe -2. So anyhow, I ordered the +2s for, again, this is a 66 Mustang Convertible, and I ordered, so the springs were about $600. The kit was about $100. And when I opened the kit, it came in a little box. There's the box over there. Of course, I got my U-bolts, got my front eye bolts, the shackles. It comes with a sticker. And I don't know what to make of this. I mean, I'm sure it's just a marketing thing, but they include Band-Aids. So with that in mind, there's the parts list that came in the box too. So with that in mind, I'm gonna crawl up under that thing and I'm gonna get busy. And I hope like heck I don't need the Band-Aids. I'm not gonna go into detail about how I'm doing this. This video is not gonna be how to change your springs. It's just more about, you know, what the looks are, because there's plenty of videos online of guys changing rear springs on these things. Check out Auto Resto Mod. Those guys do a lot of videos on this old stuff. So anyhow, I'm gonna get busy and I'll get back with you guys after I get this all installed. Well, here we are about 2 weeks, a couple of phone calls, and a whole bunch of fishing trips later, and I'm getting back on this leaf spring project. And as it turns out, this is not going to be as simple as unbolt the old ones and bolt in the new ones. I have run into some problems. And then I just didn't get back on fixing it because it's walleye spawning season and I've been up at the lake pretty heavy. So, walleye spawn's over, essentially. I put 31 walleye in the pond now. So I'm pretty happy about that. It's time to get this Mustang out of the garage. So, I started out showing you the kit and everything. And what I didn't show you was, because I didn't have an old spring off, the difference. Well, now we can see the difference. The old spring to the new. And this is causing some real issues. So the assumption that I made was just be that, you know, it's a taller spring, it's a 2-inch, or allows for a 2-inch taller ride. My assumption was just that it was going to bolt right in anyhow, and that is not the case. So you can see, I got the eyes lined up there, back here. We're about, what was it? I measured it, it's been a while now, 2 or 3 inches difference in length. But you can see the difference in height there. Big time difference in height. The problem that causes then is when you go to install it, you gotta fight it. And I'll show you what you gotta fight here. Okay, so the front bolts right in, no problem. You come back here to bolt the rear in, and because the length is so much different, this eye ends up being way forward of the shackle. So then I took my little jacked up the spring to, you know, compress the spring, which forces it back a little bit, enough to get the shackle mounted. And I called Eaton Detroit after I did that. Like, I was fighting this out here that night, like, man, surely this can't be right. And I called him up, and I talked to a different guy. I don't know who I talked to this time, but he was very helpful. And he said, you know, yep, that is right. What you're doing is right. That they're shorter. And I said, now I said, it's so much shorter that I had to, you know, I told him I was jacking it to get it back. He said, yep, you're doing it right. He said, now what you also need to keep in mind is that when you go to put the car down, this shackle being so far forward like that and that spring still sitting on that frame rail, said it's just going to sit down right like that. When you put the car down, you also need to pull down on this spring to get that shackle to lay out so that you can get some travel out of the thing. Because like right now, if I put it down, that's just going to sit solid on the frame and not do anything. I still haven't figured out how I'm going to do that. He said a lot of guys, if they got the car up on a lift when they're doing this, they put a ratchet strap down to it, maybe pull another car up close to the rear end here, and you know, for weight, and then they just pull down on that spring. I don't know how I'm going to do it. So I'm going to cross that bridge when I come to it, I guess. But I mean, I'm working pretty close to the ground here, and I don't have anything real low profile, real heavy that I can pull down against. But he did warn me, you know, if you're working on a lift and you're pulling down on that, don't pull your car down off the lift. Yeah, okay. Well, appreciate the warning. The other issue that I think I'm going to run into, it may or may not be an issue, I don't know. By the time I get the thing set on the ground, it might not be a problem, but you can see, I think it is going to be a problem. You can see the shock. Well, hopefully you can see the shock that far away. The stem of that shock is, well, it needs at least an inch. And I'm thinking that I don't want to cause myself troubles by running out of shock length. You know, like if I'm driving, I don't want it to be clunking or the shock to be holding back the suspension or the springs. So rather than putting extensions on there, because those shocks are, well, I don't know, they're probably about, this car was restored about 10 years ago, I guess. I mean, it probably only has 500 miles on it, but they're 10 years old. I went ahead and called Monroe, because those are Monroe shocks that are on it, and I kind of want to go back with, you know, I don't want to radically change this car. I mean, I just want to keep it mild, but I just want to change the look of the rear end a little bit. That's all. So I don't want to go with no big gas, you know, gas air adjustable, nothing crazy. I just want to go back with, you know, what looks right on there. So I called Monroe, told them that what I'm doing, told them I'm raising the rear end up a little bit. They got specs for that shock. I can't remember the model number on that shock, but it's actually stamped on the shock. They got the specs for that, and then the guy recommended this 31-125, and I looked up the specs on it. So the issue that I may run into is the compressed length and the extended length on this are a little longer than that one. So the extended length is what I need, but the compressed length, because I'm not changing the bump stops on it, it could compress as much as that one. I mean, hypothetically, if I hit a big bump, even though that's a +2 suspension, it will still compress to the same that the original suspension did. So Monroe didn't offer a shock that had the same compressed length but longer extended length. It was either this one or they really didn't have a better one. So without going to something crazy, I'm going to go ahead and try these. So if you guys are doing this on your 66, keep that number in mind. We'll see if this works out. With all that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and crawl up under there. Again, it's been 2 weeks. I can't remember what I got going on this spring. So I'm going to crawl up under there, work for a little bit, and I'll update you guys. All right, I don't want to get too much into the specifics of disassembly because there's already a bunch of videos on YouTube about that. But essentially, you jack up the rear end, you set the body on jack stands, and then you're using the jack then to just relieve pressure off your spring mounts there. So, like I took the U-bolts loose, you know, it's hard to judge how much pressure you're putting, you know, up with the jack. But I relieved loosened up the U-bolts a little bit, jack up the rear end just a little bit, and you can kind of feel that the U-bolts get loose, and then if you give it another, like a little half a pump, you'll see separation between the axle and the leaf spring itself. So then I came back here and loosened up the shackle bolts, and in fact the one side, I don't know if you guys can see what the hell I'm looking at or not. In fact, one side of the shackle was loose after I loosened up the nuts off of it, so I just popped that side off. And then I went around to the front, and you can probably see that big shiny bolt sticking through there. Again, this car has got a lot of new parts on it, so this thing is coming apart given that it's a 1966, it's coming apart for me like it's 10 years old. If you're working on a 66 and it's a 66 and it's not been restored, you're going to be fighting this stuff. But like, there's still grease on that bolt from where the guys put it in. I went ahead and took the shock out, and I was hoping to get at it from the trunk, but that you can't. So if you've never had the back seat out of your Mustang, it's not hard. It's really not hard at all, actually. You pop the bottom up first. You just grab the cushion and pop it up, and it pops up and out. Set it off to the side. Come back here, and there's two big, gnarly looking sheet metal screws that hold the seat back in place, one on each side down there. You'll see them if you look under the seat back. You undo those, and then it pops up off of these hangers. You undo those bolts, get them out, and then grab the bottom of the seat back, pop it up. It pops off of these hangers. Set it off to the side. Then when you come back in here, you've got easy access to the shock covers. So there's a rubber cover, or there's supposed to be a rubber cover over that little hole right there. You pop it off with your screwdriver or your finger or whatever. And then right there's the top of your shock. So they're fairly easy to get to, and you can see, again, I've got that one out. I just popped it out to get it out of the way when I'm mounting the spring under there. So that's the disassembly. The disassembly is actually pretty easy. I mean, it won't take you, shouldn't take you 15 minutes to really, well, pretty much take out the spring, as long as it's not all rusty and nasty, in which case it's going to be an all-day thing. So now I'm going to crawl up under there. I'm going to go ahead and, like I said, everything's loose. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to crawl up under here with two hands, and I'm just going to pop that spring out. Be careful when you're doing this, but again, I can see separation between the bottom of that axle and the top of the spring. So I know my jack is holding the axle up. I'm still going to be very careful. I'm not going to put my head under that spring when I go popping these the shackle and that front bolt out. So I'm going to pop that out. We'll slide the new one in. Slide the new one in. I'm going to bolt it in the front, and then I'll show you guys what it looks like back here, because that's where it gets sketchy. Okay, we got the new spring, we got the old spring out, we got the new spring in, and I've got it bolted in the front. And then I've got the jack just sitting under the spring, taking up the weight of it right now. And I'll show you the problem here. So if we look up here, you can see that how much shorter, you know, it's almost like you need a longer shackle. Well, no, you need to compress the spring. So I'm going to go ahead and, I'll do it with one hand maybe. As I jack this jack up, I'm putting pressure on that spring, and you can see it crawling back the frame rail there, which is probably not ideal, but now you got to be careful, because now that sumbitch's got some pressure on it, so be very careful with your fingers up in here. I'm going to shut off the camera. I'm going to slide this shackle out, get it in there, get the bushings on both sides, get the nuts on, and then I'll show you what that looks like. Okay, so I got the shackle put together, pretty simple, but now you can see the problem that we're going to run into when we set the thing down. It's going to be sitting on the frame, so I might be overthinking this a little bit. It might just be that we set the thing down on the ground and then just reach up in here somehow and pull, you know, after it's sitting down on the ground where we don't have to play balancing act. We just reach up under here and pull. I don't know. I might be overthinking that. We're going to cross that bridge when we come to it. The next thing we need to do, though, now is you can see the gap between the axle and the springs. So now I'm going to relieve my, my little black jack here, and then I'm going to lower this jack down, which should drop the rear end down, and I'll get my U-bolts on. So I'm going to do that off camera too. All right, well, we got the spring in there. Just mounted the shock, and the shock I went ahead and tightened nuts on both ends just because they got this big gigantic rubber bushings. but I'm going to go ahead and put weight on the springs. So I'm going to try to get the car down and get these shackles flipped around the right way, and then I'll tighten everything up, because like back here, these bolts are just more or less hand tight. The U-bolts are a little tighter, but they're not real tight. So I want to set it down, let the weight of the car sit on it, and then tighten everything up. So I'm gonna figure out how in the world to get that flipped back, and I'll show you guys what I come up with. Well, I was sure worked up about nothing. That wasn't much of a bind at all. I put a little weight on the jack, or put a little pressure on the jack to lift up the rear end, you know, because again, this thing is still sitting on jack stands on the body. So the body is essentially all the way to the car is on those jack stands up there. So I put a little weight on, or put a little pressure on the jack to lift up the rear end again, and I just pulled on the spring, and it was enough to overcome that. It really wasn't in much of a bind. It was almost in a straight line. So now now I'm jacking up the rear end of the car, and you can see the shackles coming right down. So I did it on both sides. I just put a little pressure on the rear end and just kind of tugged on that spring, and it was enough that, I mean, I'm able to still move it a little bit, and I'm taking up some of the weight of the car already. So I'm going to go ahead and focus on what I'm doing and not what I'm watching on the camera here. And I'm just going to jack up the car the rest of the way, make sure I'm not forgetting something here. Take my jack stands out and get this thing sitting on the ground and tighten everything up. Okay, well, we got it on the ground. I climbed up in the car, standing in the back seat, you know, because the seat's still not in there. So I was standing in it, and I was jumping up and down just to make sure everything was setting down where it should be. Then I crawled up under here and tightened everything up. When I tightened up my U-bolts, you know, just like you do, again, without getting into too much detail on just your standard spring change, tighten them up all the same, you know, do a little bit on each one, work your way around all four. I went so far as to use a ruler and measure to make sure they were all the same length when I was done. So I feel pretty good about everything. Everything's snugged up under here. The last thing to do is going to be hop up in the back seat, and it is kind of handy, this being a convertible. You know, you just get the roof out of your way sometimes. So put these rubber caps back over there, stick the seat back in, bolt it down, take her for a test drive. Well, I'm back from the test drive. Test drive went great. I got no complaints. I did just measure the thing again, and it was 26.5 when I started this. I put +2 springs on, and now it's 29 3/8. So those +2 springs actually brought me up 2 7/8 inches. I'm gonna park it outside where you guys can get a look at it, because I can't get far enough back here and I got so much junk in the barn. But I'm gonna go park it outside and let you get a look at what it looks like now. It's pretty bad windy out here today. I hope you can hear me, but it's dustier than all get out. It needs a bath, but that's what it looks like now. So it's definitely sitting up a little more in the rear end. That's the look I was going for. So I hope I helped you with this one, guys. If I did, click that thumbs up button. You want to see more videos of me working on stuff out in the garage or around home here, click the subscribe button. Until the next time, keep on tinkering.